The Consolidated Defense Initiative's Advanced Warfare Training Complex existed in that peculiar space where military necessity met interstellar bureaucracy and produced something that satisfied neither. Located on Station Tarragon 9, a sprawling orbital platform that circled a gas giant nobody had bothered naming because, honestly, who had the time? The facility trained soldiers from 47 different species in the art of not accidentally killing each other before the enemy got a chance to do it properly. It was, by most reasonable metrics, a masterpiece of cross-species cooperation. By every other metric, it was an administrative nightmare held together with regulations written in 17 languages, 3 of which were smell-based. The station had been constructed over 8 decades through the combined efforts of species who couldn't agree on basic concepts like up or acceptable ambient temperature, but had somehow managed to create a facility that only partially violated the laws of physics in its eastern wing. The Zynthian had contributed the structural engineering, which meant everything was overbuilt to withstand impacts that would crack planets. The Quillat had designed the life support systems with their characteristic attention to detail and paranoia about atmospheric contamination. The Heptarchs had installed the weapons testing ranges using technology so advanced it occasionally achieved sentience and had to be politely asked to stop. Training Hall Gamma 7 was a cathedral of controlled violence, a space large enough to hold 500 personnel and reinforced enough to contain detonations that would make tactical nuclear weapons look like birthday candles. The walls were lined with ablative shielding that could be replaced in sections, because it needed to be replaced in sections with depressing regularity. Scorch marks decorated the ceiling in patterns that told stories of experiments gone wrong, right, and sideways into dimensions that physics textbooks didn't acknowledge. The training cadre liked to call it character. The maintenance crews had other words for it, most of which violated regulations about professional communication. Chief Weapons Instructor Vrel stood at the center of the demonstration platform, and if confidence could be measured in gravitational pull, he would have been a black hole. He was Korathian, which meant he possessed 4 arms, chitinous plating that could deflect small arms fire, and a lifespan long enough that he'd been teaching weapons theory since before most species in the room had discovered fire. His species had perfected warfare, while others were still working out basic agriculture, a fact he mentioned with a frequency that made diplomatic officers drink heavily at social functions. Attention. His voice carried the kind of authority that came from outliving your critics. Today we examine the Mark 47 plasma compression device, colloquially known as the sunburst, for reasons that should be obvious to anyone with functional optical sensors and basic pattern recognition. The assembled cadets, 93 individuals representing 22 species, arranged themselves in proper observation formation. In the 4th row, between a Morgellian whose bioluminescent patches flickered with nervous energy and a Thrain whose mechanical augments hummed quietly, stood Cadet Kira Voss. She was human, which meant absolutely nothing to approximately half the galaxy, and was a source of mild curiosity to the other half. Mostly because humans had a documented habit of doing things that seemed suicidal, and then surviving anyway through what xenobiologists politely termed statistical anomalies. Kira stood at 174 centimeters, which made her average for her species and disappointingly short by the standards of approximately 18 other species in the room. She had auburn hair pulled back in regulation style, gray-green eyes that noticed more than she commented on, and the kind of face that people forgot 5 minutes after meeting her. This was not a disadvantage. People said remarkable things when they didn't think you were worth remembering. The Morgellian beside her, whose name was a sequence of light pulses that translated roughly to brightness at dawn, but who answered to bright, leaned closer. Your species has experience with plasma weapons, correct? Not really, Kira replied, keeping her voice low. We've got some experimental systems. Most of our military hardware is still kinetic. Bullets, missiles, things that go fast and punch holes in other things. Bright's patches dimmed with what might have been confusion or possibly pity. How primitive. But you are here learning, so there is hope. Kira didn't take offense. Humans had joined the Consolidated Defense Initiative only 11 years ago, after a first contact that had been equal parts miraculous and embarrassing. They'd achieved faster-than-light travel through a combination of theoretical physics, experimental stupidity, and a propulsion system that technically shouldn't work, but did anyway, because the universe apparently had a sense of humor. Their presence in the initiative was still probationary, still being evaluated, still surprising people who expected them to be either warriors or weaklings, with nothing in between. Vrel's 4 arms moved with practiced choreography, 2 manipulating holographic displays while the other 2 gestured for emphasis. Carathians believed deeply in the pedagogical value of dramatic presentation. The Mark 47 represents the pinnacle of portable plasma ordnance technology. Observe. He produced a metallic sphere approximately 12 centimeters in diameter, its surface etched with geometric patterns that glowed with contained energy. The device floated on anti-gravity nodes, rotating slowly to display its construction. It looked almost beautiful, which was concerning given that beautiful weapons were usually the most dangerous ones. Contained within this housing is plasma heated to 23,000 degrees standard. Vrel continued, his translator rendering his clicking speech into flat concordat standard. The magnetic bottle maintains stability through overlapping field generators. Upon proper activation, the bottle fails in a controlled manner, releasing the plasma in an expanding sphere. Lethal radius, 30 meters. Casualty radius, 55 meters. Vaporization is instantaneous within the first 20 meters. He paused for effect, which was wasted on species that didn't process drama the same way Carathians did. But old habits died hard. This weapon has 21 independent safety systems. It cannot be activated without biometric authorization from approved personnel. It cannot detonate without a 5-stage arming sequence. It cannot be triggered by electromagnetic interference, kinetic shock, thermal stress, or strongly worded criticism. That got a ripple of laughter from the cadets, who understood humor as a concept. The Thrains didn't laugh because their species had removed that subroutine 3 centuries ago as inefficient. The Quillat didn't laugh because they were thinking about all the ways the safety systems could theoretically fail. The Morgellians laughed in ultraviolet wavelengths that most species couldn't detect. Kira watched the demonstration with professional interest. The magnetic containment technology was elegant, using principles her species was still working out in theoretical models. Humanity's approach to plasma weapons involved considerably more trial and error, with emphasis on the error part. Watching functioning technology was like reading poetry written in physics equations. Stage 1 authorization, Vrel announced, pressing 1 clawed digit against a sensor panel. The sphere pulsed blue. Requires sustained biometric contact for 7 seconds. He maintained pressure, and the pulsing accelerated. Stage 2 requires command verification through encrypted channels. He tapped something on his personal interface. The sphere shifted to green. Stage 3 requires verbal confirmation code, which I will absolutely not provide today, because I quite enjoy having a body that exists in 3-dimensional space. The cadets appreciated that sentiment. Several species nodded or performed equivalent gestures of agreement. Stage 4 requires... Vrel stopped. His mandibles ceased their constant motion. One of his secondary eyes, the one that provided threat assessment through peripheral observation, focused on something that made his plating darken with concern. That's not correct. 3 words that meant everything was about to become incorrect very quickly. The sphere's pulsing had changed rhythm. The green glow shifted to amber, then to a pulsing orange that accelerated like a heartbeat approaching cardiac arrest. A sound filled the demonstration area, starting low and climbing in frequency until it hit registers that made several species flinch instinctively. Vrel's 4 arms went rigid in a posture that his species used when confronting existential threats. Impossible. The system has engaged Stage 3 without authorization. The sphere pulsed red. Stage 4 had activated itself. Stage 5 was the one where everyone in a 50-meter radius ceased to exist as organized matter. Evacuation protocol. Vrel's voice lost all instructional composure and gained the edge of someone who'd survived 3 combat deployments and wasn't planning to die during a training demonstration. Exit immediately. This is not a drill. 93 cadets from 22 species experienced the same primal response. The thing that makes things not alive is activating. Achieve distance immediately. The Morgellians dissipated partially and flowed toward ventilation systems. The Thrains calculated optimal escape vectors and moved with mechanical precision. A Karathian student near the back simply teleported, which was showing off, but nobody blamed them. The Zentari, whose species was built like mobile fortresses, charged toward exits and left floor damage in their wake. Organized chaos rippled through the hall. Emergency protocols kicked in automatically. Species-appropriate exits opened. Atmospheric barriers descended from the ceiling, though everyone understood that light shields wouldn't stop a plasma detonation. They'd just make cleanup easier. The cadets who maintained composure helped those who didn't. Several species with flight capability took to the air and immediately regretted it when they encountered traffic control problems. The hall evacuated with impressive efficiency considering the circumstances. Decades of cross-species training protocol paid dividends. The Quillat formed organized queues even while fleeing for their lives because cultural conditioning ran deep. The Heptarchs flowed through dimensional shortcuts that probably violated several laws of physics, but definitely shortened evacuation time. Vrel stood frozen on the demonstration platform, all 4 arms extended in a posture of cognitive dissonance. The sphere hovered above his primary right hand, pulsing red at precise 1-second intervals, each pulse brighter than the last. His combat augments were feeding him data he didn't want to believe. Estimated time to detonation, 38 seconds. Blast radius, 55 meters in all directions. Current distance to nearest cadet, 11 meters. Current distance to nearest exit, 42 meters. He could throw it. His species possessed excellent arm strength, and his augments would calculate trajectory automatically. He could hurl the device into the reinforced containment unit at the hall's far end, trigger the emergency blast doors, save everyone. Simple, effective. Probability of success, 68%. His body refused to move. Professional paralysis. He'd trained for 64 years, taught thousands of students, demonstrated hundreds of weapon systems, and never once had something fail during a controlled exercise. His entire worldview was built on the foundation that properly maintained systems with adequate safety protocols did not malfunction. The sphere pulsed in his hand, contradicting decades of experience with each photon of red light. 30 seconds remaining. The demonstration platform had mostly cleared. Most cadets had reached minimum safe distance or were frantically trying. A Zentari student had grabbed 2 smaller cadets under their massive arms and was charging toward the south exit like a mobile tank. Bright had dissipated enough to slip through a ceiling vent, leaving only a fading glow. Others scrambled according to species capability. Kira Voss stood 18 meters from the platform, watching Vrel's paralysis with clinical detachment. Her psychology minor from UC Berkeley had included extensive study of crisis response failures. She recognized what she was seeing: a highly trained professional experiencing catastrophic mental lock when reality violated core assumptions. It happened to pilots when instruments contradicted experience. It happened to surgeons when anatomy didn't match textbooks. It happened to soldiers when warfare became chaos their training hadn't prepared them for. 25 seconds remaining. Her survival instincts were screaming at her to run. The logical portion of her brain, the part that had gotten her through officer candidate school with top marks in tactical assessment, was running probability calculations. If Vrel didn't throw that device, everyone still in the hall was dead. Approximately 47 cadets hadn't reached minimum safe distance. The partial shielding would reduce casualties, but wouldn't prevent them. Someone needed to throw that sphere. Vrel was too locked up to act. Nobody else was positioned correctly. Kira's legs started moving before her conscious mind finished processing the decision. 20 seconds remaining. "Cadet Voss, evacuate now!" Someone was shouting from an exit. Possibly her squad leader. She wasn't paying attention. Her focus had narrowed to the platform ahead, to Vrel's frozen form, to the pulsing red sphere that contained enough angry plasma to vaporize a small building. She'd played softball for 6 years. Pitcher position. Her throwing arm wasn't Korathian grade, but it was adequate. She could make the distance to the containment unit. Probably. Maybe. The odds were terrible, but they beat standing around watching mass casualty events unfold in real time. 15 seconds remaining. Kira reached the platform in 3 running strides, and Vrel's head swiveled toward her with mechanical precision. His translator clicked rapidly. "Cadet, you are violating..." She reached out and took the sphere from his hand. The moment her fingers made contact, several things happened simultaneously. First, the sphere's authorization system detected a new biometric signature and experienced brief confusion because humans weren't in its approved personnel database. Second, every sensor in Training Hall Gamma 7 began screaming alerts about unshielded organic matter in contact with an armed plasma device. Third, Vrel's combat augments updated his survival calculations to account for the human cadet apparently deciding to die heroically, which was noble but mathematically pointless given the blast radius. 10 seconds remaining. Kira's hands closed around the sphere and she felt immediate heat. The magnetic containment was failing incrementally. The metal casing was warming rapidly as 23,000-degree plasma pressed against its bonds like a caged star seeking freedom. Her palms registered pain, but her brain filed it under "address later" and focused on the throw. She twisted her torso, wound up her arm, prepared to hurl the device toward the containment unit with every newton of force her human musculature could generate. 7 seconds remaining. Then she paused. Her conscious mind caught up with something her subconscious had noticed. The sphere was vibrating at a specific frequency, not shaking from magnetic instability, but resonating. The containment field wasn't collapsing uniformly, it was oscillating in a pattern. The plasma inside wasn't expanding chaotically, it was responding to the magnetic frequency like a sympathetic vibration. She'd written a thesis on resonance cascade failures in electromagnetic systems. If the containment field was oscillating rather than failing, then theoretically someone with sufficient conductivity and proper grounding could dampen the oscillation through direct contact. It would require a pathway for excess energy discharge, a thermal sink capable of absorbing the bleed-off, and complete disregard for personal safety protocols. 5 seconds remaining. Human bodies were approximately 60% water by mass. Water had exceptional thermal capacity. Her specific physiology ran 3 degrees hotter than human average. Her metabolic rate was documented as anomalous in medical files. And she'd discovered at age 14 that she could hold her hand over a candle flame considerably longer than her friends before experiencing burns. 3 seconds remaining. Physics was about to become very personal. Kira closed her eyes and tightened her grip. 2 seconds remaining. The sphere detonated. 23,000 degrees of magnetically contained plasma lost containment all at once. The energy had to go somewhere. Physics demanded it with the kind of insistence that brooked no negotiation. In normal circumstances, somewhere meant everywhere in a rapidly expanding sphere of ionized death that turns solid matter into component atoms. The Mark 47 was designed to release approximately 96 megajoules of thermal energy instantaneously. This was sufficient to vaporize steel, sublimate concrete, and convert organic tissue into constituent molecules before pain. Receptors could fire a single signal. Kira's hands became the somewhere. The expansion wave hit her palms and stopped. Not slowly, not gradually. Just stopped, as if encountering a barrier that conventional physics couldn't explain. The plasma roiled against her skin, desperately seeking escape, finding only flesh that somehow, impossibly contained it. Every cadet who turned to watch her presumed heroic sacrifice witnessed something that would require extensive therapy to process properly. The explosion bloomed between her palms like a flower made of captured sunlight. But instead of expanding outward in a sphere of destruction, it collapsed inward, drawn down into her hands as if she were some kind of organic singularity for thermal energy. The light was retina-searing. Several species with sensitive optical systems were temporarily blinded despite their instinct to look away. The sound was a thunderclap compressed into a space too small to contain it. A physical force that rattled teeth and vibrated bones. The shock wave rippled outward in visible distortion waves, knocking several cadets off their feet despite the distance. Then silence so absolute, it felt like pressure. Steam rose from Kira's hands in wisps that caught the hall's harsh lighting. The sphere had ceased to exist as organized matter. The plasma had discharged completely. The magnetic containment system had fragmented into metallic dust that drifted around her like luminescent snow. Her hands were scorched, the skin red and blistering, but she still possessed hands, which was considerably better than the alternative outcome. She exhaled slowly, a controlled breath that kept her vocal cords from shaking, and looked up. Every remaining cadet stood frozen in various states of disbelief. Vrel's mandibles hung open in a posture that suggested his translator had given up trying to find appropriate words in Concordat Standard. A Zentari, halfway to the exit, had stopped mid-stride in a pose that defied their species' usual grace. Bright had partially rematerialized in a ventilation shaft, their bioluminescent patches flickering in patterns that their species used to express existential confusion. Someone should probably update the safety protocols, Kira said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline making her hands shake. Well, shake more than they were already shaking from the burns. 21 safety systems apparently isn't enough. The first person to move was a medic, whose species she didn't recognize. Something with too many legs and medical sensors that clicked rapidly. Then everyone moved at once. Emergency medical teams, hazmat specialists, a weapons safety officer who ran 3 different scanners over the platform area, detected absolutely no residual plasma signatures, and began questioning the fundamental nature of reality. They surrounded Kira with professional efficiency, scanning her for radiation exposure, thermal damage, and signs of shock that should have been rendering her unconscious. Her palms were badly burned. 2nd degree across most of the surface, 3rd degree where her fingers had gripped tightest. The medical officer, a Quilat whose name involved clicking sounds she couldn't reproduce, applied regenerative gel while muttering about human pain tolerance in a tone that suggested recalculating previously established xenobiological models. "You should be unconscious," the medical officer said, their translator rendering their species' speech patterns into clipped concordat standard. "These burns would incapacitate most species we've documented. How are you maintaining consciousness?" Kira flexed her fingers experimentally, wincing as fresh pain signals filed formal complaints with her nervous system. "Adrenaline is pretty effective. Also, I suspect I'll be significantly less functional in about 15 minutes when the adrenaline crash hits." She was correct. By the time they transported her to the medical bay proper, her hands had started shaking uncontrollably, and her legs felt like they'd been replaced with some kind of unstable gelatin. The crash from crisis mode to normal functioning was never pleasant. They gave her something for the pain that made the world distant and fuzzy, then placed her hands in regeneration tanks that looked like aquariums filled with bioluminescent gel that tickled. The facility's command staff arrived 90 minutes later. Station Commander Helix was Quilat, which meant she possessed a crystalline exoskeleton that refracted light in ways that made direct eye contact difficult and somewhat hypnotic. She'd commanded Tarragon 9 for 42 years and had the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen every possible variety of chaos and filed them all under another day at the office. "Cadet Voss," Helix said, her voice resonating from somewhere within her crystalline structure. "Your actions today were either extraordinarily brave or extraordinarily foolish. The investigation board is still debating which category applies." "Respectfully, Commander, those categories aren't mutually exclusive," Kira replied. The pain medication made her honest in ways that would probably concern her later. Helix's crystalline structure flickered in what might have been amusement or possibly light refraction. "Indeed. Explain to me how you survived direct contact with a plasma detonation." "I didn't survive contact with the plasma, ma'am. I dampened the magnetic resonance cascade that was causing the premature detonation. The plasma never actually breached the magnetic bottle. It just discharged its thermal energy through my hands as a conducting pathway to ground." The commander's structure pulsed thoughtfully. "That should have vaporized your hands instantly." "Yes, ma'am." "But it didn't." "No, ma'am." "Why not?" Kira considered her answer carefully. The medical scans had revealed some interesting physiological anomalies that she'd known about for years but never mentioned, because they'd seemed irrelevant during Academy applications. Human biology was still somewhat mysterious to the greater Consolidated Defense Initiative. Individual variations even more so. "Humans have high water content compared to most comparable species," she said slowly. "We're approximately 60% water by mass. Water has excellent thermal capacity. It takes significant energy to raise water temperature. When the plasma discharged through my hands, the thermal energy distributed throughout the water content in my tissue rather than concentrating in one location." This was partially true. It omitted the part where her specific physiology had some unusual thermal regulation properties that her medical records described as outlier metabolic function. She discovered at age 14 that she could hold her hand over a candle considerably longer than her friends. By 18, she'd learned that her core temperature ran 3 degrees higher than human average, and she required more calories than someone her size should need. Her body produced and shed heat like a small furnace, a genetic quirk that made her uncomfortable in winter, but apparently useful when handling exploding plasma devices. Helix studied her with the unreadable attention of a being whose facial expressions were conveyed through prismatic light patterns. The preliminary investigation suggests sabotage. The Mark 47's safety systems were deliberately compromised through remote access. Instructor Vrel's biometric authorization was spoofed using stolen credentials. This was intended to cause mass casualties and prove that mixed-species training programs were inherently dangerous. Kira absorbed that information with the fuzzy thoughtfulness of someone on serious pain medication. Someone had attempted mass murder to make a political point. That was significantly more concerning than equipment malfunction. Do you know who, ma'am? We do. Former station technician, sympathizer with the Species Purity Coalition. He wanted to create a tragedy that would divide the initiative and justify his ideology about species segregation. Helix's structure brightened with what her species used to convey certainty. He failed, because a human cadet with barely 6 months of training did what couldn't be done according to established physics. I mostly just didn't want to watch everyone die, ma'am. That's called courage, cadet. Rest, recover. Try not to make catching plasma bombs a habit. I'll do my absolute best, ma'am. News traveled through Station Tarragon 9 faster than light, which was ironic considering FTL communication was still considered cutting-edge technology requiring exotic matter and careful calibration. By the time Kira returned to duty with regenerated hands and updated medical clearance 4 days later, everyone knew what had happened. The details had multiplied through retelling like information subjected to evolutionary pressure. By version 8, she'd supposedly absorbed the plasma into her body and expelled it as harmless light. Version 15 claimed she was secretly an energy being wearing human disguise. Version 23 involved time travel, and she stopped paying attention after that. What mattered more than the stories was how people looked at her now. The Zentari students she'd seen fleeing the hall nodded with genuine respect when she entered the common area. Bright actually manifested fully corporeal to thank her for saving their life, which was apparently significant in Morgellian culture because they preferred remaining partially dissipated around others. Other cadets gave her space, but not the isolation of fear. More the deference of uncertainty. She'd done something they couldn't explain using biology they didn't understand. Humans remained strange to most of the galaxy, and she'd just become considerably stranger. Instructor Vrel requested a private meeting in his office. A sparse room with furniture designed for Karathian anatomy, which meant Kira sat in a chair slightly too large, while the instructor loomed with his full height and four-armed presence. I froze. He said without preamble, without excuse. 64 years of combat experience across 7 conflict zones, and I froze like an untrained civilian. Anyone would have, sir. The situation violated your entire operational framework. You didn't freeze? I had less training to overcome, sir. Sometimes inexperience provides flexibility that experience constrains. Vrel's mandibles clicked rapidly, his translator struggling to render what might have been laughter or possibly existential crisis. The investigation identified the saboteur. His ideology claimed that different species couldn't trust each other, couldn't work together safely, couldn't build anything lasting. He tried to prove it by creating a tragedy. Kira nodded slowly, her regenerated hands resting comfortably in her lap. He failed, Vrel continued, because a human cadet with minimal training did what I, with decades of experience, could not. You saved approximately 47 lives, including mine. I am in your debt. You're not, sir. Anyone would have. Do not diminish what you did. His tone carried command weight that made her spine straighten involuntarily. I have fought in 7 theaters across 4 decades. I have trained thousands of soldiers. What you did ranks among the most remarkable acts of courage I have witnessed. Own that truth. The galaxy is watching now." He wasn't exaggerating. By the end of the week, reports about the incident had spread well beyond Station Tarragon 9. Consolidated Defense Initiative media picked up the story, particularly the human interest angle. Humanity's newest soldiers were supposed to be learning from experienced species, not demonstrating capabilities that made xenobiologists question their previous conclusions. The inquiries started arriving. Requests for interviews, academic papers about human thermal tolerance, a few marriage proposals from species that valued heat resistance in mates, which was flattering in a deeply uncomfortable way. The attention was unwelcome, but unavoidable. Kira gave one interview to a CDI military journal, keeping her answers technical and brief. Yes, human thermal tolerance was higher than initially documented. Yes, her specific physiology was unusual even by human standards. No, she couldn't safely replicate the feat. No, Earth wasn't secretly breeding super soldiers with plasma-catching abilities. Though given humanity's historical approach to military development, that was a reasonable concern. Training continued. Life on Station Tarragon 9 returned to its normal chaos of cross-species education and occasional diplomatic incidents over proper food temperature in shared dining facilities. But something fundamental had shifted. The human cadets noticed it first. Other species approached them differently now, with curiosity rather than dismissal, interest rather than condescension. One cadet catching a plasma bomb shouldn't have changed interstellar diplomatic dynamics. But apparently it had. 8 weeks after the incident, Kira stood in Training Hall Gamma 7 for an advanced demolitions course. Different instructor, new equipment, significantly enhanced safety protocols that had been updated approximately 14 times in the intervening weeks. She found herself studying the demonstration platform where Vrel had stood, where she'd made a decision that everyone now analyzed endlessly, despite the fact that she'd mostly acted on instinct and desperation. A Zynthian student, Kreth, rumbled beside her in subsonic frequencies, her translator converted to speech. "You are famous now. Strange experience, yes? Deeply strange," she agreed. "I joined the initiative to learn advanced combat techniques, not to become a walking physics violation." "You are not violation. You are proof." "Of what?" The Zentari's posture shifted thoughtfully. That newer species bring unexpected advantages. That experience is valuable, but adaptation more so. That humans are not weak despite your size and concerning tendency to season food with substances that cause pain receptors to activate. They paused. Also that catching exploding weapons is technically possible if you possess sufficient disregard for self-preservation. I prefer calculated risk assessment under extreme duress. Insanity, Kreth corrected firmly. Brave insanity, but insanity. The new instructor called the class to attention, and they assumed formation. The demonstration began with excessive safety protocols and multiple redundant checks. Everyone hyper-aware that nothing was truly foolproof when the universe kept producing better fools. Kira watched the weapons demonstration with professional attention, her regenerated hands resting comfortably at her sides, unmarked except for very faint scars that medical technology hadn't quite managed to erase completely. She caught a plasma bomb and survived. The act had been analyzed, documented, mythologized, and somehow transformed into evidence that humanity deserved their place among the stars. She still thought it was mostly just unusual biology, combined with questionable decision-making under pressure. But if the galaxy wanted to interpret it as proof of human capability and courage, she could live with that. Better to be overestimated than overlooked. better to be respected than dismissed as primitive newcomers who got lucky with FTL technology. The instructor activated a training device, this one carefully inert and surrounded by approximately 9 backup safety systems. Everyone watched intently, learning the mechanisms, understanding the protocols, preparing for the day when theoretical knowledge would mean the difference between survival and vaporization. Kira smiled slightly. Humanity had joined the Consolidated Defense Initiative, carrying baggage of primitive technology and concerning cultural habits. They'd been accepted partly out of diplomatic courtesy, partly out of curiosity about a species that had achieved interstellar capability despite spending most of their recorded history killing each other over resources, ideology, and which invisible entity was the correct one to worship. Now, thanks to one sabotage attempt and one desperate decision, they were the species that could catch plasma bombs with their bare hands. Not the reputation they'd planned for, but not bad for the new species on the galactic stage. Not bad at all. The demonstration continued. The galaxy turned on its axis. Somewhere in the endless bureaucracy of the Consolidated Defense Initiative, policy analysts were updating capability assessments and threat matrices, adding footnotes about human thermal tolerance and crisis response psychology. Recruitment offices on Earth were probably experiencing increased applications from people who'd heard the story and wanted their own chance to do something impossible. Kira focused on the lesson, taking notes, asking questions, being a cadet. Behind her carefully maintained normalcy, she understood that everything had changed in fundamental ways. The galaxy had noticed humanity. Now her species had to prove the notice was deserved. One crisis at a time, one impossible act that people would remember as the day someone caught an exploding star in her bare hands and walked away to tell about it. The instructor droned on about magnetic containment theory. Kira listened with half her attention, while the other half wondered what other supposedly impossible things humans might turn out to be capable of when necessity demanded it. Her species had a documented habit of looking at universal constants and asking, but what if we just ignored that? It had gotten them to the stars. It had gotten her through a plasma detonation. She suspected it would get them considerably further before the galaxy figured out whether to be impressed or terrified. Possibly both. Probably both. Not a bad legacy to build. Not bad at all. The training session ended. Cadets dispersed to their next obligations. Kira walked toward the exit alongside students from a dozen different worlds, all of them trained in the art of controlled violence. All of them now aware that the human among them had redefined what controlled could mean when physics started getting creative. Behind them, the demonstration platform stood empty, its scorch marks already being cleaned by maintenance drones who didn't get paid enough to question the nature of the stains they removed. Above them, Station Tarragon 9 continued its eternal orbit around a nameless gas giant, a monument to cross-species cooperation that occasionally produced miracles.